"Keep her upstairs," said the Duke of Kingsmere. "There will be 40 people at dinner, and I will not spend the evening watching them wander." Mrs. Ferrars, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway of the library with her hands folded and did not move. "Her Grace has already dressed, your Grace." "Then she may undress," said Lucian Mowbray, and turned back to his letters. And he did not look up, and so he did not see the look on the face of a woman who had served his family for 31 years, and who went out of that room and shut the door with great care. Because she did not trust herself with it. He was not a cruel man. He would have said so himself, and everyone who knew him would have agreed. He was a good landlord and a fair master. He paid his tradesmen within the month, which was more than most. He had never in his life raised his hand or his voice to a servant. He was simply ashamed of his wife, and had been for 2 years, and had never once said the word to himself. He had married Prudence Hale because the Kingsmere entail required a wife before his 30th birthday, or the whole of the western property went to a cousin in Antigua, and because his uncle's lawyer had produced, at 3 weeks' notice, a clergyman's daughter of blameless family and no fortune who was willing, and because Lucian Mowbray at 29 had been in a temper with the world and had thought, with the particular stupidity of a handsome man who has never been refused anything, that it would not signify. She was plain. There was no getting round it, and he had never tried. She was small and sallow, and her nose was too long, and her hair was the colour of weak tea, and she had a way of holding herself very still and very upright, like somebody standing in a doorway they have not been asked into. At the wedding breakfast his friends had been kind about her, which was worse than anything, and so, without ever deciding it, without one moment conscious wickedness, the Duke of Kingsmere had built himself a life in which his wife was never quite in the room. She did not come to town. There was always a reason. The house in Grosvenor Street was being done over, or the season was tiresome, or the roads were bad. She did not sit at his table when he had company. She dined at 5 in her own small parlour, and when the carriages came up the avenue she went upstairs, and the county, which had been curious for 3 months, and hadn't stopped being curious, spoke of the Duchess of Kingsmere, when it spoke of her at all, as an invalid. She was not an invalid. She was 30 years old and rode out every day of her life. He knew that in the way a man knows the furniture of his own house. He simply never thought about it, and Prudence never once complained. That was the thing that had let him do it, all those 2 years. That was the trick of it, and he understood it only afterwards. She never wept, never argued, never made a scene at the foot of the stairs. She said, "Yes, Lucian," and went up. She said, "Of course," and dined at 5. Once, only once, in the first winter, she had stood in the door of his library in a blue gown she had made, and said in a voice that shook only a very little, "I am told the Purslows come on Thursday. I should like to meet them," and he had said without looking up, "It will only be dull for you," and she had said, "Yes, of course," and gone away, and he had gone on with his letter and had thought, if he thought anything at all, that she had taken it well. He never saw the blue gown again. It was the horse that undid him. In the November of the 2nd year, his own hunter went lame, and he sent word to the stables for another, and the groom brought round a raking grey mare he did not know, and Lucian said, "Whose is this?" "Her Grace's, your Grace." He stood in his own stable yard with the reins in his hand. "My wife rides this?" "Every morning, your Grace," said the groom with a curious flatness. 6 o'clock, near enough. "She has the mile round on Tuesdays and Fridays, and go over to Cold Row on a Wednesday, and up to the Fell on a Saturday if the weather holds. She'll be at the Row now, likely. She always is, of a Wednesday." Lucian Mowbray heard himself say, "Why?" And the groom looked at him, one flat, disbelieving, unforgettable look from a man of 50 who had held his stirrup since he was 7, and said, "You'd best ask her, your Grace." He did not ask her. He rode to Cold Row. He told himself all the 4 miles of it that he was riding that way in any case, that a man may look at his own cottages, that it was nothing. Cold Row was the poorest end of Kingsmere. 11 cottages in a wet fold of the hill, built for the quarrymen 100 years ago and never much mended since. He had not been down there in 3 years. He came round the bend of the lane at a walk in a thin rain and pulled up under the thorn tree and did not go on. There was a cart at the end of the row. There were women round it. 6 or 7 of them in shawls, and a great many small figures running about in the mud. And standing up in the cart, in a plain brown habit with the hem 6 inches deep in clay, handing down a sack of something to a woman with a baby on her hip, was the Duchess of Kingsmere. She was laughing. Lucian had never heard her laugh. He would afterwards, in the long unsleeping nights, come back to that fact and turn it over and over and find no bottom to it, that he had been married to a woman for 2 years and had never once heard the sound she made when she was happy. She was laughing and she was arguing good-humouredly at the top of her voice with an old man in the doorway of the second cottage. "And I have told you, Jonah Pike, the chimney will not draw while the thorn is over it, and you will not let me cut the thorn. That thorn were my father's, your grace. Your father is in the churchyard and you are not, and you will be if you go on breathing that smoke." She swung down the last sack. "Very well. Keep your thorn. I shall have the chimney raised instead, which is 4 times the money, and you may tell everybody in this row that you beat me, because you did." And the whole of Cold Row laughed, the women, the old man, the running children, laughed the easy, ordinary, unfrightened laugh of people who are entirely at home with somebody. And one of the women put out a hand and steadied the Duchess of Kingsmere as she jumped down from the cart, and said something, and the Duchess put her arm round the woman's shoulders for a moment, and they stood in the rain together like 2 friends. Lucian Mowbray sat under the thorn tree in the rain and could not move. He watched for 3/4 of an hour. He watched her go into 4 cottages and come out of them. He watched her take a child's hand and look at a cut on it and bind it up with something out of her own pocket. He watched her sit down on a doorstep, on a wet doorstep on the ground in the mud, in her own clay-stained habit, beside a woman who had begun to cry, and put an arm round her and say nothing at all for a long time. He watched an old woman come out with a cup of something and press it on her, and watched her drink it, and watched the old woman's face while she drank it. They loved her. There was no other word, and he did not look for one. 11 cottages in the worst corner of his land, and every soul in them turned toward that small plain woman like plants to a window, and she went among them easily, and knew their names and their children's names, and quarrelled with them, and was quarrelled with, and was at home. She was at home there. She had never once been at home in his house. The rain came on harder. He turned his horse and rode away before she could see him, and he was 3 miles gone before he understood that he had run. He sent for Mrs. Ferrars that night. She came and stood and folded her hands, and he found that he could not begin. He walked to the fire and back twice. "How long has her grace gone to Cold Row?" he said at last. 2 years, your grace, since the first month she came. Every week? Twice a week in winter. Mrs. Ferras's voice was perfectly even and perfectly hard. "And to Marl on a Tuesday, and the almshouse on a Friday, and she has taught the Rose children their letters on a Sunday afternoon these 18 months, in the barn, because there is no school and you have never been asked for one." Lucian stood with his back to her. "Why have I never been asked for one?" "Because her grace said you were busy." The fire cracked. Somewhere in the great house a door closed. Mrs. Ferrars said, "The Duke of Kingsmere, I want the truth from you, and I will not punish you for it, and I would rather you were brutal than kind." There was a long silence behind him. "She pays for it out of her pin money," said Mrs. Ferrars. "The blankets, the coals for the row, the physician when the Pike girl was bad in the spring. When her pin money ran out in the 2nd quarter of last year, she sold her mother's watch in Kettleby, and she told me it was to be mended, and it never came back, and I have never let on that I knew." Her voice did not rise at all. "The servants call her Our Lady, your grace, among themselves, which they should not, and I have never stopped them. There is not a soul on this ground from the fell to the river who does not know her. There is not a soul at your table who has ever seen her face." Lucian did not turn round. "Thank you," he said. "You may go." "Your grace, please go," said the Duke of Kingsmere, in a voice that did not sound like his own, and she went. He sat up all that night in the library with the candles going out one by one around him. He did not weep and he did not rage. He simply sat with his hands on his knees and let it come at him, the whole of it, 2 years of it, arriving all at once like water through a broken wall. The blue gown. "I am told the Purslows come on Thursday. I should like to meet them." It will only be dull for you. Keep her upstairs. There will be 40 people at dinner, and I will not spend the evening watching them wander. A woman on a wet doorstep with her arm round a crying stranger. A woman handing down sacks in the rain and laughing. He had told himself, for 2 years, that it was a matter of taste, that he had been unlucky, that the marriage was a business, that he was not unkind. He had been so scrupulous about not being unkind. He had never said a harsh word to her. He had never needed to. A man does not need to be cruel to a woman he has quietly agreed with himself does not exist. And she had never complained. She had never complained, and he had taken that for consent, and it was not consent. It was a clergyman's daughter of no money and nowhere to go, who had looked her situation with perfect clear eyes and had decided somewhere, in some cold hour of that first winter, in a house where she was not wanted, that if she could not be a wife she would be of use. She had not withered. That was the thing that broke him. She had gone out into the wet fold of the hill where the poorest of his people lived, and she had built herself a life, out of nothing, out of a pin money and a sold watch and her own 2 hands, and she was loved there, loved by everybody who had ever been allowed within 10 feet of her. He was the only person in the county of any consequence who had never been within 10 feet of his wife. The Kingsmere dinner was on the Thursday, 40 covers. It had been arranged for a month. At 6 o'clock the Duke of Kingsmere went up the west stair, which he had not climbed in 2 years, and knocked at his wife's door. Prudence opened it herself. She was in the plain grey she wore in the evenings. She had a book in her hand, and her finger in it, and she looked at him with a startled, careful, entirely unresentful face, the face of a woman being polite to a visitor, and something in Lucian Mowbray's chest tore straight across. "Lucian," she said, "is anything wrong?" "Come down to dinner." Prudence looked at him for a moment. "There are 40 people," she says. "You said." She stopped. She began again gently. "I have not the gowns for it. There has been no occasion, and I have not ordered any, and it would take 3 weeks. Wear anything. Wear that." Lucian. And now she did look at him properly, and he saw with a lurch that she was not embarrassed at all. She was thinking. She was working out kindly and carefully how to spare him. "You have never once wanted me at your table. Why tonight?" He could not answer. "You have been to Cold Row," said Prudence. The blood went out of his face. "Jonah Pike saw you under the thorn," she said. "He told everybody in the row before I had got out of the second cottage. He was extremely pleased. A very faint smile, and then it was gone. So you have seen it. And now you are ashamed. And I am glad of that, Lucian, I am. I would rather you were ashamed than comfortable. But I want you to hear what you are asking." She set the book down on the table beside the door. "For 2 years I have been sent upstairs," she said, quite steadily, "and I have gone. And now you have found out that your people are fond of me, and you feel it, and so you have come up those stairs to fetch me down. And if I come, Lucian, if I come tonight and sit at your right hand in a grey gown in front of 40 people, what am I? I am the thing that makes you feel better. You are not asking for your wife. You are asking to stop feeling what you felt under that thorn tree." Her chin lifted a very little. "You have been ashamed of me for 2 years. You are not ashamed of me tonight. You are ashamed of yourself. It is the first honest feeling you've ever had about me, and I would not take it away from you for the world, but it is still, my dear, entirely about you." The passage was very quiet. "I will not come down," said Prudence Mowbray. "Not tonight, not to be your penance." And she said it without one particle of anger, and put her hand on the door, and then, because she was who she was, she stopped and looked at him, and her face changed. "Lucian," she said, more softly, "you look ill. Have you slept?" And that, after everything, was what finished him. He got down the stairs somehow. He got through the dinner, 40 people, and the Purslows, and Sir Marcus Vane's laugh going up and down the table like a saw, and the Duke of Kingsmere sitting at the head of his own board answering when he was spoken to and hearing not one word of it. At 11 in the drawing-room Lady Purslow said brightly, "And how is the poor Duchess? Still so delicate?" Lucian set down his glass. "My wife," he said, into a room of 40 people, "is not delicate. My wife rode 9 miles in the rain on Wednesday to carry coals to Cold Row, sat on a wet doorstep with a woman whose husband is dying, and came home in the dark, and she has done it twice a week for 2 years. and she pays for the coals herself, out of her own pocket, because she has never asked me for a penny. His voice was not loud. It carried to every corner of that room. She is not upstairs because she is ill. She is upstairs because I put her there. I have kept the best thing in this house in a back room for 2 years, because I did not think she would look well beside me at a table, and she has been out on my land making it worth something while I have been down here, being agreeable to you. The silence was total. You will excuse me, said the Duke of Kingsmere. I find I am not fit company. I have not been fit company for some years, and it is only tonight that anybody has troubled to tell me so, and it was a woman I do not deserve, and she did it kindly, which was the worst of it. He walked out. He heard behind him 40 people begin to talk at once, and he did not care, and that the not caring was the strangest and cleanest sensation he had ever known in his life. He did not go up to her. He had learned that much. He went out through the garden door into the freezing dark, and stood on the wet grass in his evening coat, and looked up at the one lit window on the west side of that great black house, and he said aloud, to nobody, in the voice of a man taking an oath, then I shall have to earn her. The trouble with an oath sworn on wet grass at midnight is that a man must get up the next morning and find out what it means. He did not know how to earn anybody. He had never had to. Lucian Mowbray had been born to a great name and a great face and a great deal of money, and every good thing that had ever come to him had come to him unasked, and he discovered now, sitting in his library at 8 in the morning with a cold cup at his elbow, and a headache like a bell, that he possessed no skill whatever for the only work that ever mattered. His first instinct was to buy something. He caught himself at it. He was halfway through a letter to a jeweller in town before he understood what he was doing, and he looked at the half-written page for a long moment, and then put it in the fire. His second instinct was to apologize magnificently at length in writing. He wrote 4 pages that night. He read them over in the morning and found that every one of them was about him, his blindness, his shame, his awakening, his resolve, and that he had contrived, in 4 closely written pages of contrition, to make himself the interesting party once again. That went in the fire too, and it burned a good deal hotter than the first. He went to the vicar instead, on the Sunday, and asked him a question he had never in his life asked anybody. Mr. Ardley, said the Duke of Kingsmere, how does a man make amends when nothing he can do is enough? The vicar, who was a mild man of 60 and had been at Kingsmere for 30 years and had watched all of it, took off his spectacles and polished them for rather a long time. He does not make amends, your grace, he said at last. There is no such thing. It is a word men invented so that they might have somewhere to stop. He put the spectacles back on. What he does is that he becomes a different man, and he goes on being the different man for a very long time in the wet, when nobody is watching and nobody is thanking him, and one day, perhaps in 11 years, the person he wronged looks up and finds that the man who wronged her is simply not there any more. That is all that is on offer. It is not a great deal. I am told it is sufficient. Lucian sat with that. There is a rule in it. Then he said slowly, I must not tell her. Ah, said Mr. Ardley, and smiled a little. Now you have it. If I tell her it is not amends, it is an account being presented. Just so. Lucian rose and stood turning his hat in his hands. She has been out on that land 2 years, he said, and never told me one word of it. Not the school in the barn, nor the coals, nor the blankets. She simply went and did it. He looked up. I have been thinking that she must have wanted very badly to tell me in the beginning. I should think she did, said the vicar gently, and I would not have listened. No, your grace. He rode into Kettleby on the Monday and found the watchmaker's shop. It was a small dark place that smelled of oil, and the man behind the counter was old, and when Lucian described what he wanted, the old man went very still and then said carefully, that would be the little gold watch, your grace, with the flowers on the case. It was pledged in the spring of last year. Pledged, not sold. Pledged, said the watchmaker. The lady meant to redeem it. She has been in 3 times to ask after it, and each time she has looked at it, and each time she has gone away again, because she had not got the money, and she was very civil about it, and she never once said who she was. He looked up over his glasses. She told me she was a governess, your grace. I found out otherwise after, from the coachman. Lucien Mowbray put his hand flat on the counter. How much? £11 and the interest. He paid it, and carried the watch out into the street in his fist, and stood in the noise of the market with his eyes shut. Then he sat down on a bench in the churchyard, and turned the little flowered case over and over in his fingers for the better part of an hour, and had the hardest argument of his life with himself. Every nerve in him wanted to ride home and put it into her hands and watch her face. And he knew with a cold clarity he had never had about anything before, exactly what that would be. It would be the 4 pages again. It would be among his own absolution and calling it a gift and asking her, one more time, to be the person who made him feel better. You are not asking for your wife. You are asking to stop feeling what you felt under that thorn tree. So he rode home and went up the west stair for the 2nd time in 2 years and did not knock. Her room was empty. She was out at Marle as she was every Tuesday, as she had been every Tuesday for 2 years, while he sat downstairs and never once wondered. It was a small room. It was much smaller than he had remembered, and much plainer, and there was a mended place in the counterpane, and a rushlight, and 1 shelf of books, and on the little table by the window a bowl of the year's lost hedge berries, put there by somebody who had wanted the room to have something in it. Lucien stood in the middle of his wife's room and had to hold the bedpost. Then he laid the watch on the table beside the berries, in plain sight, with the chain coiled beside it. He left no note. He did not write the words that were crowding up in his throat, that it had been £11, that he had paid it gladly, that he was ashamed, that he loved her and had only just found it out. He put it down, and he went out, and he shut the door. She never mentioned it. Not that week, not that month, not ever. He did not ask. He did not look to see whether she wore it. He made himself not look, walking out of rooms rather than look, for it had come to him that even the looking would be a kind of asking, and he had asked enough of that woman to last 100 years. It was the first thing Lucien Mowbray had ever given anybody without wanting to be seen giving it, and he found, to his very great surprise, that it left a man lighter and not poorer at all. So he began where she had begun. He began at Cold Row, and he began badly, and he was not spared. He rode down on the Wednesday and left his horse at the top of the lane and walked in, alone in an old coat, and 11 cottages went silent as he came. Jonah Pike stood in his doorway under his father's thorn and looked at the Duke of Kingsmere the way a man looks at weather. Her Grace ain't come yet, he said. I did not come for her Grace, said Lucien. I came for the chimney. Pike's eyebrows went up half an inch, which for Jonah Pike was an exclamation. It took Lucien Mowbray 4 hours that first day to be permitted to look at a chimney. He was made to stand about. He was made to wait while a woman finished what she was doing. He was asked by a girl of 9 with a bandaged hand whether he was really the Duke, and, on being told that he was, informed that her Grace was better. Yes, said Lucien, I know. He raised 11 chimneys that winter. He did it without touching the thorn, because it had been Jonah Pike's father's, and because he had been told, by his own wife, in a laughing shouted argument he had watched from under a tree like a thief, that Pike had beaten her, and Pike should have his victory. He built the school. He built it in stone, at the end of the row, and he did not put his own name on it, and when the mason asked what should be cut over the door, Lucien stood a long time with his hands behind his back and then said, Cut, for the children of Cold Row, from their friend. Nothing else. He did not tell Prudence any of it. That was the discipline of it, and it nearly killed him. He got up at 5 and went out and worked his own land, and he came home at dark, and he did not go up the west stair, and he did not tell her, and she found it out, of course, in pieces all that winter. From the women at the Row and from Mrs. Ferrars and from the mason's boy, and Lucien would come in some evenings and find that a plate had been kept hot for him, and that there was a fire in a room he had not asked for a fire in, and once, in February, a pair of dry gloves left on the hall table with no note. He carried the gloves about in his pocket for a week like a boy. He went to town in March and cancelled the house in Grosvenor Street, and came home and never went again. He wrote to the Purslows and to Sir Marcus Vane, and to 9 other people, and the letters were all the same, and they were all short, and every one of them said, in his own hand, that he had spoken the truth in his drawing-room in November, that he did not withdraw a word of it, and that the Duchess of Kingsmere would receive when it suited her and not before. And in April, when the fever came up the river and took hold in Marl village, he went down with her. She did not ask him to. He simply appeared at 6 in the morning in the stable yard, mounted with his coat buttoned, and Prudence looked at him across the grey mare's neck and said nothing at all, and they rode out together in the mist. They worked 11 days. He was no use for the first 3. He was in the way. He did not know how to lift a sick man, or boil a sheet, or hold a cup for somebody whose hands shook. And he learned, and he was corrected by his own tenants, and he took it. On the 5th day, the physician's cart broke an axle 4 miles out, and Lucian carried the man's box the 4 miles on his own shoulder. On the 8th, he sat all night with a quarryman named Hedge, who had no family living, and read to him out of a book he could not afterwards remember. And at 4 in the morning Hedge died holding his hand, and the Duke of Kingsmere came out of that cottage into the grey light and found his wife sitting on the step, waiting for him, with her head against the doorpost, asleep. He sat down beside her on the wet stone. After a while she woke and did not move a wedge. She said, "Gone." Prudence closed her eyes. "He was in the quarry when your grandfather owned it," she said. "He remembered the old Duke. He used to tell me." Lucian looked out at the mist coming off the river. "Tell me the rest of them," he said. "Every one. I want their names." And she did. She sat on a wet doorstep at 4 in the morning with her shoulder just touching his, and told him the names of the people of Cold Row and Marl village, all of them, the living and the dead, and their mothers, and what they had done, and what they were afraid of. And Lucian Mowbray listened to his wife's voice in the dark for an hour and a half and did not once interrupt. When she had finished, the sky was going white at the edge. "Prudence, I have not asked you for anything since November." "No," she said. "I noticed." "I am going to ask you now, and if you say no I shall not ask again, and it will make no difference to any of it. Not the school, not the chimneys, not the fever, none of it. Those were never payment, and I will not have them counted as payment." He turned his head. She was watching him, hollow-eyed, filthy, small, with her hair coming down and 11 days of other people's sickness on her hands, and he understood it completely, and finally, sitting on a doorstep in the dark, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. And he had been blind for 2 years, and it had not been her fault. "Come down to dinner," said the Duke of Kingsmere. Prudence gave a shaky laugh. "Lucian, not for penance, not to be looked at, not to make me feel better." He took her hand the first time, 2 years, and he had never taken her hand, and he held it in both of his, mud and all. "Come down and sit at my right hand for the next 40 years and be seen, and be rude to Lady Purslow, and tell me what a fool I am at breakfast, and let me be your husband. I do not deserve it. I know exactly what I did, and I shall know it every day for the rest of my life, and I have made my peace with that. But I love you, Prudence. I have loved you since I sat under a thorn tree in the rain and heard you laugh, and understood that I had been married for 2 years to a woman I had never met." Prudence Mowbray sat very still. Then she put her forehead down onto their joined hands, and Lucian felt her shoulders go, and he gathered her in, his whole hidden, unwanted, magnificent wife, and held her against him on a cottage doorstep in the wet spring dark, while she cried 2 years' worth of tears into his coat. "I did not want to be beautiful," she said at last, muffled. "I never asked for that. I only wanted to be in the room." "You are the room," said Lucian. "You have been the room all along. I was the one standing outside it." They came into Kingsmere at 7 in the morning, on foot, leading the horses, and Mrs. Ferrars met them at the door with her hands to her mouth, and looked once at their joined hands, and had to go away. The Duchess of Kingsmere sat at the head of her own table for the first time in June. There were 40 people. There was a new gown, dove-grey silk, which the Duke had gone himself to Kettleby to order and had got the sleeves wrong. She wore it anyway. The county came in a spirit of ferocious curiosity and stayed in a spirit of something else entirely, because it turned out that the invalid Duchess of Kingsmere was the dreest and most alarming woman in 3 shires, and could talk to a bishop about drains, and made Sir Marcus Vane laugh until he wept. Lady Purslow at the far end was heard to observe that her grace was really quite striking when animated. Lucian at the other end did not answer, because he was not listening. He was watching his wife down the length of a table he had kept her from for 2 years, watching her turn her head and laugh, and he was thinking that a man may be given a second chance he has done nothing to earn, and that the only decent thing to do with it is to spend the rest of his life at the earning. He kept the gloves, the dry ones from the February hall table. He kept them in a drawer in the library at Kingsmere for 31 years, and when he was old and she was old, and their grandchildren were being noisy in the long gallery, and somebody asked him, as somebody always did, once, how the Duke and Duchess of Kingsmere had come to be so ridiculous about each other after so long, he would take out the gloves and look at them, and he would say, "She left these on a table for me when I had given her every reason in the world to leave me instead. She did not say a word about it. She never has." And he would put them back carefully and shut the drawer. "That is the whole of it. I was a fool for 2 years and she was kind to me anyway, and I have been trying to catch up ever since, and I never shall, and I do not wish to. There is no better way for a man to spend his life."